Hello everyone, Professor Cicerelli here. Another video for you today. We're going to continue talking about punctuation. So we've talked about commas. If you have not watched my video on commas, you should go back and watch that video on commas where I go into some of the four different occasions in which you need commas, and that's going to help 95% of your comma mistakes. And continuing along that, we're going to talk about another punctuation mark, one that I would say is underutilized. I would say with commas, sometimes you've got people who use them too much, and then you've got people who don't use them at all. And with semicolons, I feel like it's underused. It's rarely do I see cases of people using semicolons too much. And so when we're talking about the semicolon, we're talking about that punctuation mark that is a period with a comma underneath it. And that's your semicolon. And its main use, I would say 95% of the time, its main use is in connecting two independent clauses, as you see here on screen. It's connecting two independent clauses. If we need review on what an independent clause is, go back and watch my video on clauses. I'll also link it up here. So that's what a semicolon is doing. It is, as you can see in the example there, the silence deepened, the room chilled. It's connecting two independent clauses. So your main test to see if a semicolon is being used correctly, your main test, I should say. It's not 100% because I'm going to give you one or two other occasions where you might use a semicolon. But mainly, if it's not one of the other two that I'm going to tell you, then it's going to be used for this purpose and for this purpose only. It's to connect two independent clauses. So your main test to see if that semicolon is being used correctly is, do I have independent clauses on both sides of it? Now, what does that mean? That means I've got to go and check, do I have subject verb? Can it stand on its own? Do I have subject verb? Can it stand on its own? If so, then that sentence is a candidate for a semicolon. Now, your book gives you, I think, good advice, and that's that I think it's here, that these two clauses should be closely related. Now the reason for this is that semicolons are not that long of a pause. Okay, if we had to give different punctuation marks pauses, I would say, if we measured punctuation marks according to their pause, I would say a period is a full stop, a full pause, a breath. Okay, comma is not that much of a pause, really not that much, and a semicolon is somewhere in between a comma and a period. It's not that much of a pause. Okay. The reason this matters is if you've got two independent clauses, but they're not closely related to each other, then when your reader comes across that semicolon reading, he or she is going to read right through it and move on to the next sentence. And if those two independent clauses are not closely related, the reader's going to get thrown off. Okay, they're going to rapidly go from one idea to the next, and it's going to be like whiplash. Whoa, these two sentences are so different. Okay, so if you've got two very different sentences, two very different independent clauses, then I'd suggest putting a period between them. If you're not going to join them some other way, put a period between them. Now, if you look at the example here, the silence deepened, the room chilled. The sense I'm getting from the way that sentence is punctuated is that these two events are happening very close together. Okay, the silence deepened, the room chilled. One right after another, really quick. So I want my reader to go from one to the next because they're happening pretty close together. Okay, But if they were not related, if these two things were not happening close in time to each other or close in proximity to each other, then I would not have a semicolon there. Look at the next one, next example. The life had not flowed out of her, it had been seized. Okay, so there you've got two sentences, two independent clauses, and we can check. Subject, helping verb plus verb, and then subject, and then helping verb plus verb again. And so, are they closely related? Yeah, I mean, they're so closely related that we're using the personal pronoun it to take the place of life. So we're going from one right into the other, and because they're both independent clauses, semicolon works. The book gives you a really good suggestion here, which is that anywhere that a semicolon would work, at least in this case, I should say, in this case of two independent clauses, because I'm going to show you one or two other examples. In this particular circumstance with independent clauses, if you're using a semicolon, then it will always be appropriate to use a period also. But just notice that a period is doing something different stylistically, not grammatically, stylistically. Oftentimes when I talk to students about grammar, I will say, there are certain grammar rules, there are the certain commandments of grammar, but certain language choices are style. Okay, do I use a semicolon? Do I use a period? That's a style choice. Do I decide to swap out my noun for a pronoun? Okay, use he, she, it, they instead of the noun, the name of the noun. That's a style choice, right? You might do it, and then the person might be confused about what the pronoun's referring to. So this is another example of a style choice. It's not necessarily a grammatical one. As long as you're using that semicolon to connect two independent clauses, grammatically you are in the clear. Stylistically, you might not want to have a semicolon because you don't want to suggest that those two clauses are closely related. Okay, so it's up to you, and we'll look at some examples at the end to help with that. Okay, like I said, this first example connecting two independent clauses, that's 90%. That's 90%, 95% of the time we're going to use semicolons. The other 5% is with what's called a complex list, or the way the book describes a complex list is a list where the items in the list or the items in the series have other punctuation within them. Okay, so let me say that again. A complex list is a list in which the items in the list, each individual item, has punctuation nested inside of it. And if you look at the example here, you'll see. But one of the and we'll go over it. But one of the ones that I always like to use with my students is if you were listing a bunch of cities and states that you'd been to, right? I've been to Albany, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Los Angeles, California. Okay, those three city-state pairs. Okay, each of those items in the series has further punctuation within it. Albany, New York, I'm separating Albany from New York with a comma, so that I don't confuse my reader. Like Albany is one thing, New York is another thing. I don't want to do that. I don't want to add that level of confusion. So what you would do to help for for clarity's sake is say, I've been to Albany, comma, New York, semicolon. What was my other one? Chicago, comma, Illinois, semicolon, and and Los Angeles, comma, California. Okay. And so if you look at the example here in the book, there are images of a few students. Colon. We're going to talk. I talk about colons in another one of my videos. Check that one out too. I'll include it up here. But so we're introducing the list with the colon. That's one of the uses of the colon. And I go into much more detail on that in another video. But there are images of a few students. Colon. Now we have a list. Now look at the items in the list. Erwin Peshtor, a muscular German boy with a strong accent. So you'll notice this first item, and this is one item in the list. Erwin Peshtor. This information about him, we even talked about this in my video on commas. We talked about information that's not essential. It's separated from the noun it's modifying, and that's what's going on here. So I'm giving you extra information about this guy Erwin, and so this one item in the list has commas in it. Okay, and look at the problem I would run into if I had there are images of a few students. Erwin Pashtor, comma, a muscular German boy with a strong accent, comma, Dave Sanchez. Okay. You might think this person and this person were different people. Okay. But they're not. They're the same person. So the semicolon is telling me this is one item in the list. The semicolon is telling me this is item number one. Okay. Next item, which also has punctuation in it. Commas, again in this case. Dave Sanchez, comma, who was good at math. So again, I have adjective information here describing Dave Sanchez. This happens to be this is a relative pronoun connecting this adjective information to Dave, but it's not necessary information. But I separate it with comma, and so that means it is a part of what I'm calling a complex list. So you want to separate these items with a semicolon. And then lastly, same thing. Separate us from the third item in the list, semicolon again, and then we end with and. Okay. Yes, you can use a semicolon next to an and here's a perfect example of where you would do that, where you've got a complex list. Okay. All right, we're going to look at we'll look at an example. We'll look at an example of this one in the exercise at the end. But if you've got questions, like always, I'm always happy to answer people's questions. Throw them down in the chat for me, and I'm happy to answer anything that you might have about these. Just a couple reminders from the book. Just when you're looking for semicolon mistakes, you're never going to use this. Remember, the general rule is either this list 5% of the time or 95% of the time when you're connecting to independent clauses. So if you ever find yourself using a semicolon, like here, to connect dependent clause to independent clause, that's what I've got here. When the sun sets, that's a dependent clause. Everyone gathers at the lake to watch the fireworks. This is an independent clause. I've got dependent connected to independent. That is not a use case for a semicolon. That is a use case for a comma. Okay? And then it's also telling you, do not use a semicolon to introduce a list. Okay, that's what a colon's for, and that's why you should watch that colon video of mine, where I walk you through how to use a colon. Okay. All right, let's do a couple of exercises, and I'll have you do a few on your own. Okay. Let's look here. Let's look at this one. Okay. We'll read for a little bit of context. The Summer Olympics of 2008 in Beijing, China, brought about the record-breaking swimming records of Michael Phelps, who captured 8 gold medals. Phelps earned the record for the most gold medals in a single Olympics, previously held by Mark Spitz with 7 gold medals. Okay, so I've got a semicolon here, right here. Am I using it correctly? Is it fulfilling one of these requirements? Item in a series or 2 independent clauses. Okay, do I have 2 independent clauses? Phelps earned the record for the most gold medals in a single Olympics. Yes, that is an independent clause. Okay, so far so good. Do I have an independent clause after it? Previously held by Mark Spitz with 7 gold medals. No, that is not an independent clause. What is it missing? It's missing, what are we talking about? What was held by Mark Spitz? Okay, so the subject is missing, and held here would not be a complete verb. We need a helping verb. We need something was held. It was previously held. That would make this an independent clause, but both of those, subject and verb, are missing, so this would be not an independent clause. This would be a participial phrase. So not 2 independent clauses, therefore not a good use of a semicolon. So here's your question: how do I connect? And if you go back and watch that comma video, this will tell you, how do I connect an independent clause to the comma video. Go back. How do I connect an independent clause to a participial phrase where that participial phrase is not necessary information? Previously held by Mark Spitz is not necessary information to understanding this. It's just additional information to tell you about the medals. Okay. Or the record, rather. Sorry, the record. Not the medals, the record. So how do I do that? I separate it when I have adjective information that is not necessary to the sentence, comma. Comma is the appropriate way to separate this. So do I have that as one of my options? You bet I do. D. Good. Now why not B? Well, I already said I don't have 2 independent clauses, so if I put a period there, this would be a sentence fragment, right? Okay. Let's do another one. Let's see. Okay, let's look here. So go on. Let's read a little bit for context. So let's do 3, and then I'll link you to, and then you can do let's see. How about you do oh man, they don't have. Just looking for. All right, try. We'll do. We'll do. We'll do 3, and then you can do try 4 and 5 on your own. Try 4 and 5 on your own. I think you'll get 5. I think will be good. Yeah, try 4 and 5 on your own. And so do 4 and 5 on your own, and then leave those answers down below. But let's do 3 to finish it off. Okay, and we'll read for some context. Both Olympic swimmers, talking about Phelps and Spitz here. Both Olympic swimmers won their medals in a combination of individual and relay events, but Phelps won 5 of his medals for individual events, while Spitz won 4. Okay. Let's look here. So we're just looking at this part. Okay. We've got a comma there, and I guess because this is a semicolon exercise, what we can ask ourselves is, does a comma work there, or do we need a semicolon? Let's look. Would a semicolon work? Do I have 2 independent clauses? Do I have an independent clause here? Phelps won his 5 medals for individual events. That is an independent clause. Okay, that is an independent clause. I have subject and a verb. I've got my object of 5 medals. And then it stands on its own, meaning it doesn't begin with a dependent clause. I'm sorry, it doesn't begin with a subordinating conjunction. Okay, so that's an independent clause right there. What about here? While Spitz won 4. Okay. Do I have an independent clause? Well, I have a subject. I have a verb. I have the number of medals. Okay. So far, so good. Can this whole thing stand on its own? Nope. Why not? What does this begin with? Okay, what is that? If you can't remember, then you need to go back and watch that video on prepositions and conjunctions. Okay. While is a subordinating conjunction. While is like because, although, even though. Okay, meaning, yes, I do have a subject and a verb here, but it begins with a subordinating conjunction. So subordinating conjunctions always introduce dependent clauses, always. And so I've got independent clause connected to a dependent clause. No good. How can I fix this? Well, if you go back and watch that phrases and clauses video I did for you, I think I told you in there that whenever you have an independent clause followed by a dependent clause, you do not need comma. You don't need a comma there. But we certainly cannot use a semicolon here. So you definitely can't use C. Definitely can't. I should say, probably not the best to do A and leave it with a comma there. Your best bet is to go with B, because you don't generally need a comma when you've got independent clause then a dependent. When it's the other way around, when you have dependent then independent, you do need commas, but not in this particular case. So best answer there would be B, and I would say if you didn't see that the semicolon wouldn't work, this one, if you didn't see that C was wrong, then go back and read here, because it's telling you do not have 2 independent clauses there. Okay. All right. So like I said, try 4 and 5 on your own. Leave me comments down below. That ends this video. If you guys want more info about semicolons, if you want more info about other punctuation marks or any other kind of grammar tips, let me know, and I'm happy to give that to you. All right. Bye, everybody.